Thank you very much. Welcome, and the question now is, before we have the polling question, the more burning question is, why do we have two panels on the future strategy of the IAIS? It is, of course, because monitoring and addressing market developments and standard setting is only part of the whole story. In order to achieve our mission, we also need to have proper implementation assessment of standards, and good supervisory practices at the end of the day, so that we really get to what we call effective and globally consistent supervision of the insurance industry for the benefit of policyholders. So this panel will focus on our high-level goals 3, which is on supervisory practices, and 4, which is on the observance of standards. Let me briefly introduce my panelists. I have here to my left John Godfread, who is the North Dakota Insurance Commissioner. We have next to him, we have Laura Tamblyn-Watts, CEO of CanAge. And we have Mary Frances Monroe, Director for Insurance Regulation and Policy of the Institute of International Finance. Welcome to you. And we have online, and I hope it works, Tomas Soley, who is the General Superintendent for Insurance in Costa Rica and current President of ASAL. So welcome. I hope you can hear us well, and we have a good connection. Let us starting also with a polling question. Now turning more on practices and strategic themes. So we were first discussing in the previous panel, discussing about the risks, and now we go to the strategic themes that the IAIS has developed so far, or is currently on the way to develop. And the question to you would be, where would you most like to see the IAIS place its greatest focus in the upcoming strategic plan, which is the 2025 to 29 period? So what we have said here is climate risk, conduct and culture, digital innovation, diversity, equity and inclusion, financial inclusion, operational resilience and cyber risk, or you find anything else. So, whereas we wait for the results later on, I would like to start to start first with the supervisory practice, and hopefully have enough time also to come then to the implementation assessment as well. So more on the supervisory practices, what should the focus of the IAIS be in the next strategic plan on this further development of supervisory practices to benefit supervisors, consumers, and the industry? And I will start with my two fellow supervisory colleagues, without disclosing who is any of my favorite colleagues here. John, of the existing priorities, where do you see the greatest focus in the new strategic plan? Or do you even see other areas that we should address?
Sure. Well, thanks, Peter, and thanks to the IAIS for putting us together. I think this is a fantastic forum for us to come and collaborate and do all the things that we do as supervisors. I also think it's a very unique opportunity to do the survey and encourage everybody to give that feedback. I think that helps define the direction of the IAIS and us as a collective body, which is very, very important. So feedback's always important. And I think when you look at this list here, Peter, there is no wrong answer at this point. And I think the first panel did a great job of expanding on some of those issues. But a few that we're certainly focused on is, obviously climate risk is a big area, and I think the panel previously touched on that pretty heavily. One area that I think we should probably also touch on is, and that's very near and dear to my heart, is that transition risk, and that was touched on a little bit near the end of that panel, is what does this movement to the next wave of energy look like? What does that transition mean and entail for not only the insurance market, but also for the consumers that we all represent? It's something that I certainly think needs to be addressed, and certainly included in any discussions about climate risk. DE&I think that the IAIS has a fantastic opportunity to, as a global organization, to bring together cultures from across the globe and have those discussions. So it's a very meaningful forum to not only help inform and engage those priorities, but this is truly one area where I think that we could make a difference in the insurance public and in the insurance industry is through collaborations and forums like this. So that's another obviously high priority for us. And then near and dear again to my heart is digital innovation and technology. And what does that mean? We are in the middle of an insurance revolution, evolution, whatever you want to call it. And it's a fascinating time to be a part of insurance. I've even got my wife convinced that insurance is fascinating, which maybe she's just humoring me. I don't know. I don't even know if I'm her favorite regulator right now, but she does. And it's a really an interesting time to be a part of this. And we look back at history. The insurance industry has been around for a long time. We have been through evolutions. We've been through revolutions before. The advent of the automobile, the advent of the computer, you can name these things, and we've withstood those revolutions, those evolutions, and so that gives me hope. And again, it's really interesting to be a part of it right now, but it's certainly something that we need to keep our mind on, keep a very close eye on, because as I always say with my colleagues here in the United States, is the industry we have today is going to be vastly different 5, 10, 12 years from now. It could look very, very different. And the regulations and the supervisory practice that we're doing right now will have an impact on that. And it could be good, it could be bad, it could be somewhere in the middle. And it's a matter of working together and coming to those solutions and continue to have our eye on that ball is really, really important. So kind of a long-winded answer, but those, I think everything on the list is great. Those would be the kind of the 3 areas that I would focus on.
Thank you very much. I think it's all about the priorities and focusing, because nothing should be dropped from the list. But we always it's always a question of how to put the resources and in which period we can achieve what. But thank you for that. Tomas, may I turn to you and ask you, particularly from a more perspective of the EMDE jurisdictions and who form a big part of our membership in the IAIS. Where do you see those priorities on the IAIS strategic themes?
Sure, Peter, and thank you to IAIS for inviting me to join this panel. It's really a high topic to discuss about. Maybe I will share with you some consideration in the perspective of Latin American market. I think that from IAIS high-level goal number 1 about assessing and responding to market developments, a most significant focus on climate protection gap and inclusion could be delivered. On the first matter, the natural catastrophe protection gap in Latin America is estimated at more than 95% for floods and about 80% for storms and earthquakes, only surpassed by emerging Asia. And that is, they are really hard for our region. So between 1950 and 2014, the IMF calculated that the economic cost of the average natural disaster was equivalent to nearly 16.5% of GDP for small states and almost 3% for non-small states of Latin America and the Caribbean. We have a very asymmetric development situation for in our region. Maybe the greatest financial impact of all the world regions. As stated by IAIS last April, insurance supervisors have a critical role, I'm totally sure about that, in shrinking NatCat protection gaps by connecting stakeholders, building awareness and education, and promoting the regulatory conditions for innovative and sustainable solutions that could emerge from the insurance industry. The greater focus on climate and closing natural catastrophe protection gaps in the next IAIS strategic plan will empower supervisors to trigger significant initiatives and strengthen society resilience. So regarding inclusion, new technologies, as Joe said, innovative products and distribution channels, and the synergies between the macro, meso, and micro insurance levels enable conditions for the industry to efficiently reach the unserved part of the population that urge financial protection and risk management support in this conjuncture of uncertainty. Insurance inclusion is a very complex matter. As a chair of Financial Inclusion Forum, I have this discussion very near from my heart. So it is interconnected to social, economic, legal, and policy making areas. A fundamental precondition for inclusion is market trust, which is achieved when governance, prudential, culture, and conduct of business sound practices are endeavored in insurers and intermediaries for the benefit for fair treatment of the policyholder. Also, awareness on education, on risk management, and financial are necessary at the micro, and macro level. For example, with the governments and policymakers. And last but not least, it is almost as challenging as necessary. And that is why acknowledgement, exchange, guidelines, and support from IAIS are critical to strengthening the capacities of supervisors, especially in the country, to support and enable inclusiveness and resilience to our markets. Back to you, Peter.
Thank you very much for that. Tomas, very interesting aspect on this protection gap, because we heard on the previous panel that is under pressure because of the insurability type of topics. On the other hand, it's under pressure because of the affordability of insurance products for certain parts of the population. So I think it's very good to look at these different aspects that might have. Laura, looking at the strategic themes so far, do you think we take care enough of consumers' interests and concerns? And if not, what would you place importance on as a strategic topic?
I like how he already assumes my answer is going to be no. No. First, I just want to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory in Seattle of the Dumas people, and part of my Canadian journey on truth and reconciliation is to make sure that we're paying attention to the people whose land we're on, and I just wanted to take a moment to open with that. Okay, back to no. So I think it's really important that we're talking about who's the favorite insurance regulator. And what I love is the self-love in the room. That's really important, because I think we need to love ourselves because we are not well loved by anybody else.
So true.
And so building on that, I think that in-person piece is really important so we can keep those connections. Who here, just by a show of hands, has ever been told by industry, by government, by community, civil society stakeholders that they're not sure what we do? Raise your hands, please. Not sure exactly what we do. Yes. Okay. A second show of hands. Who has ever heard that terms and conditions of insurance policies are not entirely clear? Okay, so it's important that we start there. We are regulating a product that is expensive for most people or most companies. It costs a lot. It affects almost everybody, either in a public aspect, through government reinsurance or backstops or something. It affects everyday people's pockets. You wouldn't believe the amount of money, well, you probably would, that individual people put aside for insurance. They don't do it because they like insurance. They don't even do it because they like us. They do it because of relationships. Fundamentally, it's about relationships. It's about that coffee table in London all of those years ago where people got together and figured out how they could help each other. I kind of wonder if we've lost that a little bit. Fundamentally, people don't love paying for insurance because they're worried that they're not going to get what they need out of it. And I think increasingly some people are wondering, does it make sense to pay for insurance at all? That's a risk that's not up there. The lack of trust and relationship with the sector. They're thinking about whether their child can get surgery, or whether their house is still going to be standing, or whether their business can weather through another pandemic. And they can't understand what their policy says. Why would you buy something that you can't understand? When fundamentally you're worried that the regulator either doesn't help, or frankly, you don't know what they do to begin with. So I think we need to go back to first principles, really, truly back to that coffee shop in London, and try to remember that we only have a sector if people are willing to buy. And if people don't know what the product is, and they don't like you very much, and they're increasingly worried that the values aren't being shared by regular people and regular business, then that's something that we need to think about in our strategic plan.
Thank you. Very clear and outspoken. Mary Frances, I think there is always this, I've heard for many years that the industry would like to have more convergence about the supervisory practices in order to make global business much easier. So how do you see supervisory practices developing, and where would you put the focus on the strategic themes?
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you to the IAIS and to the NAIC for the kind invitation to participate in this discussion, which I think is very timely and very important. And I would say among those strategic themes, I don't like the focus on risk. I'd like to move the focus to the dynamics. And the dynamics acknowledge that there is a lot of interplay among these different categories. And there are interplays that reflect the dynamics within the insurance industry, within the broader financial services sector, and also the interplay with a lot of other important sectors. I'll just name three: energy, construction, and agriculture. I think we need to look at this more broadly and more holistically before we start to think about how to address that. We need to consider how these dynamics impact the industry and also key segments, key lines of business within the industry. And in light of the IAIS mandate, how should the organization respond to these dynamics? And I think in order to do that, we need to increase the collaboration, and I echo Jad's call for increased collaboration through continuation of the global seminar, but also more informally. There are a lot of opportunities for collaboration with the industry that owns the risk and really best understands the risk and understands these dynamics and how these dynamics are impacting day-to-day business. And this goes beyond the traditional approach, and I do appreciate the value of data calls and the value of the information that's received through the data calls, but those data calls are a point in time. They're a point in time in the past. They need to be augmented with what is happening right now, what insurers are seeing coming down the road, in order to bring a more qualitative and a more complete picture of the trends and dynamics that are impacting the industry. And in that way, I think also both the industry and the standard setters and the regulators can look at how there may be new manifestations of legacy risks. We talk about interest rate risk, credit risk, market risks, a whole range of risks, but they don't manifest the same way across time, as we all know. And how are new dynamics impacting those risks and creating different avenues for the manifestation of certain risks that we may not otherwise have seen. And then I'll just make a couple more points. One is in terms of standard setting. I encourage the IAIS to continue its practice of proportionality, flexibility. We don't want to lock in an approach that in a very rapidly changing environment can become no longer fit for purpose in a very short period of time. We need to understand that it'll take a lot more work, but we need to always be on the lookout as to whether these dynamics have shifted in a way that calls for a reconsideration of an approach. And then finally, I think the IAIS and other regulators, this is not just a comment for insurance regulators, but regulators across a wide range of of industries and activities need to work collaboratively to look at how their mandates and how their areas of competency affect other sectors. For example, the impact that data, digital authorities have on the insurance sector, competition, privacy authorities would have on the insurance sector as well, so that will broaden the understanding of these cross-sectoral dynamics. And by cross-sectoral, again, I mean not just financial sector cross-sectoral, but much broader cross-sectoral dynamics.
Thanks, my Francis. Maybe we can display the results of our polling question just to see where we are. Here we are. Okay, it's not very much surprising, but I take from the first round, one point is, first of all, the list is relevant. Secondly, we should see that risks and new developments come in different ways. They might be like old risks, but appearing in a new format, and that the interlinkage and the interplay between all of them, and of course the basic elements for the consumers. We need to be aware of time, so I move quickly to a second round, which I like to focus on the implementation assessment and the capacity building. Because if there are new risks and we develop new standards, then obviously it's then sooner or later time to look on whether they are not only on paper or on the website, but whether they are effectively implemented in the jurisdictions, and how supervisors can best make use out of that and put that in practice. So may I turn first to Tomas. What do you think, what areas of the assessment staff and the kind of capacity building particularly would be most beneficial to supervisors in the next phase of our strategic plan?
Thank you, Peter. Very interesting, the results of the survey. Maybe I have a little different position about a couple of those topics. We are in a conjuncture of uncertainty due to climate, socioeconomic and geopolitical conflicts, and cyber and health risks. But at the same time, it's a conjuncture of challenges and opportunities like inclusion, shrinkage of the protection gap, ensures new value propositions and roles, digitalization and innovation. So those most of those topics are in the with a high priority in the results of the survey. But considering that, I think that the most beneficial areas for implementation, assessment, and capacity building for supervisors will be, and that is because I think that is in the core of what is happening in the companies. There is a balance between capital and people. So corporate governance, ICP 7, and risk management and internal controls, ICP 8, are maybe one of the most important topics. Because there is the quality of managing a company. Secondly, valuation, capital adequacy, and other ICP related to solvency, of course. But in first, the first topic that I think is so huge, important, is conduct of businesses and public disclosure, 19 and 20, ICP 19 and ICP 20. Why? Because sound corporate governance, including the corporate culture, risk management, and internal control, is the cornerstone to correctly facing all new challenges and risks. Insurance will correctly manage innovation, climate, cyber, and new technologies if a solid corporate governance environment exists. So regarding solvency, it is important to highlight the need to integrate climate scenarios and work in its prospective modeling, and considering transitional and physical risks associated with climate change and variability. And finally, conduct of business and public disclosure are key areas to strengthening the trust in the insurance market, as was said before, and contribute to the well-being of policyholders and the general public. A corporate culture, a model of businesses, and product governance focus on the fair treatment of customers will be essential to achieve objective of diversity, equity, and inclusion of the synchronicity of the protection gap. So, in addition, promoting and monitoring fair consumer outcomes, as defined in ICP 19, is essential to impact policyholders and society's resilience. Regarding public disclosure, we need to promote the transparency of the market, especially in areas of common interest like sustainability, disaster risk data, fraud, as well as conduct of business on the DEI indicators. Taxonomies, shareable data, and KPIs are challenging issues where capacity building will be of most benefit for supervisors. But maybe the core of all of this is corporate governance. Without a good corporate governance, it will be hard to implement any other priority that IAIS will decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomas. So just to avoid, we have 7 minutes left, but we'll give all the chance. Mary Francis, how do you assess the activities of the IAIS in this area, and do you have any ideas or input for the next phase from the industry perspective? Mary Francis.
Thank you, Peter. From my vantage point, the IAIS does a good job in terms of implementation, assessment, and capacity building. I know that there are a lot of challenges coming forward with respect to the ICS, and I understand that the IAIS is developing some handbooks that should allow for more consistent assessment criteria in order to prevent idiosyncratic judgments from influencing assessments. With respect to capacity building, I know that the IAIS has long had a number of very important collaborations with Access to Insurance Initiative, the Financial Stability Institute, the Sustainable Insurance Forum. I think these are all very, very positive. Kind of bridging back to my earlier comments, perhaps these could also be expanded to other key sectors in order to understand those dynamics that I was referencing earlier. And then I would just note, in the interest of time, I'll try to be brief here, that the engagement with the industry as well as the supervisory college mechanisms are an excellent approach to engaging in capacity building for certain jurisdictions and also for operationalizing implementation assessments. So let me stop there.
Thank you very much. Of course, Laura, the question is, you had a plead for the more basic look to what the consumer needs are. So what would be more concrete ideas, let's say, or input what the IAIS could do concretely on that?
So we talked about the challenges first. The good news is it's never been easier to engage. And people have never been more interested in actually engaging. It's never been more simple to get your message out, and there's never been as many people searching for that information. That's the great news. So here's 3 things that you can do in your office Monday morning. Really actionable things. I think that's going to make a difference. The first is, do you have a consumer office or something like it built into your internal structure? If not, think about creating a team or a cross-functional team if you don't have a dedicated office, specifically with the mandate of thinking about the consumer lens internally. Start that. Number 2, do you have an outside consumer advisory panel, a group that meets regularly? It can be on a voluntary basis. If you have a little money, us nonprofits are really grateful for a bit of an honorarium, but if not, you'll find that people really care. Ask civil society experts, people with lived experience, folks that know the sector and the people that you're trying to serve, and get them to use a funnel approach. Think about policy innovation at a broad level and get them excited about new ideas. Think about having regular meetings on perhaps a monthly basis to actually work through that consumer office internal piece, actually to make sure that you're getting the best possible knowledge. And at the pointy end of it, Make sure that they're there to help you as champions to get that message out. They will help. So that's the second piece. And the third piece, at this conference and this organization is uniquely placed to make a profound difference. Start a fund and bring together civil society, consumer groups to come and participate. It's really hard for people to participate if they're working for not-for-profit organizations, so start a very modest fund. Add a couple of dollars, euros, yen to your annual fees, and bring that so that people who have that expertise can participate, and they will. They'll give you such good value, and they'll become champions for the industry, making our lives all easier.
Thanks very much for concrete proposals and thoughts for further thinking. John, implementation always ends up on our tables, so what should be the focus from your side?
Yeah, I think some of the things that we've taken, the steps we've taken at the IAIS have been very, very helpful, and I know I'm very short on time, but I want to make sure to recognize my colleague, Jeremy Quick from the Guernsey, who is also the vice chair of our Supervisory Forum. That's one thing that we've reestablished here at the IAIS to bring, again, all sectors of the membership together, whether it's the mature markets or the developed markets, bring them with emerging markets to share ideas and have that kind of coffee table discussion about what's working, what's not, and how do we learn from each other at various stages of development. And that's been a very, very key forum, I think, and we'll continue to move on in that place. So I'd encourage you, if you're not a member, to look at joining that forum. But that's one area I think that we can continue to play a role at the IAIS level. Now there's technical experts. They have a number of committees and forums where all the technical stuff happens, but I think it's that implementation phase and making sure that that application is as broad as we possibly can make it and have that input from as broad a sector as we can. And also it gives us an opportunity to collaborate. I think Susan mentioned it again, that we are in a polarized time. We are in I call it a rubber band or a whipsaw time, and by its very nature, insurance is risk averse. I would argue it's fairly moderate. And having the opportunity for leadership, and we're all leaders, whether we like it or not, in our local communities at some level, to come together and have these conversations and have that understanding of where we are at as a sector, what are we doing for our consumers, and how do we provide the best possible services and coverages for our communities is really, really important, because we're in a time of hyper-politicization where we can get into our sectors, we can get into our groups and avoid these kind of conversations which are so critical here. So maybe that's another plug for the continued in-person Global Insurance Seminar. Sure. But I think it's a nice opportunity, again, for us to break out of our traditional shells and come in and have these conversations and get exposed to different things, different ideas, different economies, and different countries, and really learn from each other. So I'm at zero, and Dane is walking up.
Absolutely great. Thank you very much I think in 35 minutes we got a lot of input to take on board for the next strategic plan. That will not be the last time of interaction, but we will now go to think more about it and be more have more to say already at the annual conference. And thanks. So we had a lot of interesting proposals, including the future meeting policy. Thank you very much.